Mat Hughes, welcome to Super Data Brothers.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So, we're going to talk today about two things. One is what we observed at Gartner, and the second is the rapidly evolving BI market, and the way those two things kind of collide. Because I think there's a lot to be learned by what happened at Gartner, what people talked about, what they didn't talk so much about, and what's going on in BI. But before we get into that, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Matt. I've spent a little bit more than the last decade in the consulting space around data and analytics. I came up and grew up on the kind of in the Tableau and Snowflake technology side of the stack. I've spent a lot of that time thinking about what I would think of as people-centered analytics and why implementing a lot of these tools doesn't actually solve people's problems. And so that's the thing that I try to write about. After spending the last decade of consulting doing this, and especially the last couple of years doing a lot of what I would call enterprise tech stack rationalization projects for customers, right? Helping them look at their entire analytics tech stack and figure out what's next after tools like Tableau or Alteryx or Power BI. I started seeing over and over and over again for lots of different reasons, Sigma Analytics as being the answer for a lot of these customers. And so just actually moved over to start working for Sigma earlier this year in a way that I'm really excited about. So I'll today definitely not here representing Sigma as a product, but here from that vantage point.
Right.
Really on the consulting side, happy to talk about the BI space in general.
Yeah, and this is not a sponsored Sigma episode or anything like that, right? Matt Matt came onto my radar, and I'll post the link in the chat, and you can catch it in the show notes if you're watching this after the fact or listening on Spotify. We're on Spotify and Apple Music now, Apple Podcasts rather. Matt wrote this incredible blog post called "Why Your Next BI Renewal Should Be Your Last," and I think that it was really one of the most insightful pieces I've read about what's happening in the BI market. I have to tell you, Matt, when I read it, I thought to myself, God, I wish I had written this because there was I was just nodding my head along with it. And so let's start the conversation there. From your perspective, what is happening in the BI market and how has it evolved, especially since the release of kind of the AI tools in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I'm so happy you enjoyed that, overly long, kind of pretentious piece.
It was great.
I enjoyed the reaction that everybody got. But I wrote it because I think that the entire BI tool category is in a very interesting place right now. Some might call it a fraught place, right? I think that if we zoom way out, right, I think that you've got a whole category of mostly legacy providers that have been built around this idea of seeing and understanding your data, right? Figuring out if, pulling the data together, figuring out based on the business logic if we're happy or sad about the metrics. But it turns out that people need to do more than see and understand their data. They need to actually apply their own groupings or annotate things or build processes or workflows or take those lists and push them into other SaaS systems. And so, I think that part of the thesis is that the category actually hasn't been solving people's problems for a very long time, right? I think that you can see examples of newer, more recent tools that are coming up in this space that are, trying to solve that entire workflow problem. But I think what you also see is a lot of legacy vendors that are either making a platform play, so they'll add these action-oriented things if they keep you in a walled garden, or they're actively in the enshittification phase of their product, and they're betting that migration costs keep a lot of their customers hostage. I'm not super fond of that stage of the market, right? I tend to be a big fan of what the data analytics category can do for companies. I think there's real value there. I tend to be kind of appalled by the kind of value extraction phase of this, and would like something that's a little bit more human centered and is solving people's problems. So that's kind of one problem. But then now you have generative AI coming in and kind of disrupting that entire space, both with the way that people interact with the data and the analytics artifacts, and in the way that they're built. And I think that what that means is that you've got, for a lot of customers, they're with a legacy product that's not solving their problems. They feel like they're held hostage with the renewals, and they're looking around and they're realizing there's a lot better options here. There's better tools that I could choose, or entirely different approaches that I could take, or maybe I just focus more on my data platform and add the BI features there. There's a lot of threats in that space right now, and so I think it's both a really interesting time to be building in that space, but it's also, I think, a really fraught time for an organization to be buying in that space. I think it's hard for them right now. So that was the goal behind the essay there, and that was also, I think, a glimpse into how I'm viewing the market right now. I think that even since I wrote that now a few months ago, it's changed quite a bit, and it maybe even accelerated, right, more than what I was expecting.
Things are moving so fast in the BI space especially, both within the BI space and I would argue away from the BI space, at least what we classically think of as BI. And I agree, like that definition of BI, which was making it as easy as possible for a data analyst to produce a dashboard that someone could look at and make a decision. It always left this question, okay, now what? What next, right? And the legacy BI vendors' attempts to answer that question typically leaned into data science, maybe because that's what was cool at the time. So like, oh, well, what's next? Can we add, like, let's put some predictive capabilities in this tool. Or let's do some very naive and uninteresting, like automatic data classification and alerting. And those features universally flopped. I don't know any legacy BI tool where people are really using a lot of that stuff. The next step, and the exciting step that I think has been unlocked partially by AI and partially by BI's move into more of an engineering or as code focused workflow, is actually doing stuff. So I'm in the BI tool, I've identified something. Now I want to take an action in another system. And we see a lot of that potential in the market right now. Now, before we go any further, I do have to remind everybody, if this is your first time watching the Super Data Brothers, this is a live show. This is not pre-recorded. Matt and I are talking right now at 12:10 Eastern Time. And so if you get your questions and comments into the chat, your reactions, your hot takes, I will read them, and Matt and I will answer them and react to them. Things like Ramona Truda, friend of the show, saying, hello, data friends. Welcome back, Ramona. Ramona, I built a dashboard about who attends this show, I have to tell you, using MotherDuck and their new Dives feature. And you are the #1 Super Data Brothers super fan when measured by a combination of showing up and talking. So congratulations, you're #1. We've got Kapil Saini saying it was a good read, Matt, and also sharing the link. David Pidsley, Gartner analyst, is here with us. So I think David is looking forward to hearing those spicy takes on their recent conference. Welcome, David. And then Aaron Wilkerson saying, I'm not sure how I feel about low stash Ryan. My wife said the same thing, Aaron. So you're not alone. Okay, so I am kind of curious. We see this going on with the category. The legacy vendors are engaged in enshittification. I see that as well. I will tell you, like Tableau, for example, I feel the frustration of the Tableau community. And I know people, at Salesforce who are frustrated, who have worked on that product for a long time and are kind of feeling the effect of now being absorbed into a much bigger organization that has bigger goals than just making the best BI tool. And so we see that happening in the market. Now, I think we also kind of saw that happening at Gartner. Like, I don't know, exactly your feelings on it, but when I was walking around the show floor, it seemed like the platform vendors didn't talk a lot about their BI capabilities. Everything was about context layers and semantic layers. And I think there's a lot of confusion right now about what those things even are. and what they mean and how to build them. But it was clear that for an analytics conference, we talked very little about analytics, at least what we classically think of as analytics. Did you get that vibe too, walking around the conference?
Yeah, definitely so. I think that there's a shift in the space to focus on attention and the attention economy and where people are going to pay attention. And I think that right now people are paying attention to agentic features, to generative AI for lots of really good reasons, right? I think that the other thing that I saw that I thought was really interesting at the conference. I mean, I tend to be someone at conferences that spends like an inordinate amount of time on the expo hall floor, right? I think it's good to not just go around and talk to the different products that are there and the friends that are the different ones, but also figure out how people are talking about themselves and what's capturing attention and what's not. The thing that I was really struck by is there's this like rapid convergence of features, I think, across the board at Gartner, right? That there are, whether you want to blame agentic coding and people realizing they can just do things now, or it's really the kind of rapid unbundling or bundling of the space happening back and forth. But, I saw a lot of blurring of lines where traditionally I would think of a company as, being focused on things like data loading and data movement, and now building front end interfaces really rapidly. Or I think of a tool that's really focused on building a front end interfaces, and now all of a sudden they are doing streaming data for agents, right? And I'm making that up a little bit to be facetious, but not quite, right? I think there's a lot of crossover happening. I think a lot of coalescing around the different messages, and in a way that I think is really confusing for the buyer that's going around in there, right? I think that it's hard to tell right now, like what is a basic tacked on feature for different products versus what is a core competency, because it's so easy to tack on features now.
Yeah, and everybody is now doing everything, it seems like, right? So part of that is there has been platform consolidation. Like you look at ServiceNow bought Pyramid, for example. So there is platform consolidation going on, and people are the big vendors are trying to build full stack solutions to offer in the space. But it was amazing to me to see, like last year, everything was about agents, and there was clear agent washing going on. Every vendor was an agent vendor, agentic BI, agentic whatever. And this year, you almost felt like the vendors that were still saying they were agentic, it was like, oh, they didn't get the memo. Now they're supposed to be saying that they're like the context layer for agents, not just that they have agents. If all you do is agents, now you're behind. Meanwhile, in the real world, outside of certain sectors and very tech-forward companies, almost nobody has deployed any of this stuff. We like here in the Detroit area, we don't have, we're not Facebook. That's our big industry. Our big employers here are not Facebook, and they're still trying to solve BI problems in a lot of ways. You're on the show floor at Gartner, and you would think everybody's building ontologies, right? Is how it felt. And look, I think that's important. I'm doing, I'm writing a book for Wiley about AI and BI, and I'm doing a lot of research, and a big part of the book is about that, is about how you do need context. You need to provide that context to the AI. But just seeing that on the show floor and seeing a lot of the presentations that I went to that I think in past years really would have been very kind of like the Tableau way of doing things focused, right? So like data storytelling, for example, was a lot about the data storytelling presentation I attended, put on by Gartner analyst, was a lot about, well, how do you get the context from your ontology and context layer into the front end so that people can see it, right? As opposed to what we might think of as just, visualization best practices. I wouldn't say that's a solved problem. I don't think BI is a solved problem. But it's clear that like the locus or the focus rather of the hype has moved away from that and is really into how do we build up this context layer? How do we build up the context layer essentially without even having a solid definition, I would say, of what that is or how or how to build one, or what to do with it once you have it.
Yeah, I think that in a world where your consumption of data and your actioning of it is just as likely to be happening via an AI agent as it is a person, I think that you've got a renewed interest in both, like, making sure the data is accessible, but also, I mean, I don't know if you've worked with some of these agentic analytics tools. It sometimes feels like what it is like a barely trained intern who's fumbling around your data estate and making a bunch of really good guesses.
Yes.
And so it turns out that adding in a semantic layer or enough information to help them make better guesses is actually maybe more valuable than it was before, if nobody was actually going to look at these things. But I think that what you're seeing right now that's really interesting is there's I think a symbiotic nature happening between the agent tools and then the providers of context, right? So if you're a BI tool, in most organizations, their semantic layer isn't what they would think of as a semantic layer. It's actually just the semantic layer that exists in their BI tool, right? Their semantic layer is fragmented across 100 different Tableau workbooks and 12 different data sources, but it's still there. And so there's this symbiotic relationship that's happening between the agents and the BI tools, where the agents need to stand on top of the shoulders of the BI tools so that they can understand the context and provide useful answers and make better guesses. But at the same time, the BI tools, they don't want to just be agentic endpoints, right? Because, well, you sell a lot fewer seats if you're just an agentic endpoint. And so, that's a problem too. I think that you're seeing that show up in the conference, right? As your BI tools, to come back to your point, are now selling themselves more like a provider of context to agents than they are just people, right? It's still not clear to me, though, who's going to have a better answer in that space, right? I think there are actually still some pretty big questions that reasonable people could disagree on. So if you think about that symbiosis problem, I think the big question that comes up there is where do you apply AI reasoning in the user experience, and who do you pair it with? Do you pair it with a non-expert business consumer who's doing ad hoc analysis on the fly and creating, a dashboard over and over again? Do you pair it with an expert developer building governed tooling and you get a lot more throughput because of the way that you paired it with them? I think that's a genuinely open question. That's a fork and how people will approach it. And I think that you see new categories of tools forming, on the Gartner Expo Hall floor around that question.
Yeah, and it's clear. We have a 4-year-old inbound, so we'll see if we get an appearance here. I can hear her. It was clear. That was clear. That was clear on the show floor, and like you said, and I think one of the interesting things when you talk about the context being locked in the BI tools, especially, this has been such a huge problem forever, and when we were talking before the show, it's the source of a lot of legacy vendors' stickiness. Is that there's so much built up in that in the 1,000 Tableau workbooks you have, or whatever BI tool you're using, the context that exists in that BI tool, a lot of times is the business context. In my experience, it often has not filtered down into the actual core infrastructure layer. Your Snowflake doesn't contain the business context. It's kind of the foundational layer, but then what people have done in BI on top of it is really the value add business context. And that has been the BI vendor's secret weapon. Well, you can't leave us, right? Even as we inshitify the product, you can't leave. But we were talking before the show, that's not true anymore. Using Claude Code, you really can, and not just Claude Code, but any of these, you really can look at what is trapped in the BI tool and automate the migration of that logic into another system. I think you were saying, you've talked to a systems integrator or consulting firm that like they have an offering around that now, right? So the path out of your shitty BI tool just got a lot easier.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of twofold. So one, I think the better BI tools aren't forcing that one-way collection of data and information and forcing them to be the source of truth. I think that the better ones are actually forming a two-way interface back into Snowflake or into Databricks or into your cloud data warehouse, so that as people are going against that full workflow that we were talking about earlier, you get benefits from doing that. And then at some point you're enriching your data, and at some point you should push it back into the warehouse so that your source of truth is like a virtuous cycle.
Yes.
Right? But putting that aside for a moment, to your point, it's not the vendor lock-in via proprietary formats is not the moat that I think a lot of legacy providers think that it is, right? Yeah, to your exact point, what we were saying earlier, so one of my favorite things about my role is I get to work at I think a really forward-looking product company, but I do it in a role that is focused on consultancies, right? So I work with a lot of the system integrators and consultancies in that space, and I'm talking with one of the more forward-thinking ones, and what they're essentially saying is that, hey, we used to do migration projects and we used to pitch migration projects, and we'd pitch them as these large time and materials projects that frankly were like bread and butter for the consultancy, right? That's if you talk to consultancies, a big segment of their business is often migrations as people move from one BI tool to the next, right? Because if you're a customer, you don't want to take your people off of the business and off the things they're doing just to move things over and keep the lights on. And so, you either stay on the tool that you don't like, or if the pain gets high enough, then you maybe bring in someone to do the migration. But the pain has to be high because it's expensive, right? I'm talking to some of these smaller forward-thinking consultancies, and they're saying, well, we're actually to a point, there's two trends that I think are happening right now. Part of it is agentic coding, the Claude code of it all, the ability to take an idea and a deep expertise of the proprietary technology like a Power BI or like a Tableau, point it at the files, and then build utilities that extract that out. So that's, Claude code combined with their expertise is one of the trends. And then the other trend is that I think a lot of your BI tools are understanding that this moat is going away. And so they're actually changing their tooling so that you can do code first development, so that you can integrate more so with Claude code. So I think you're going to have this flywheel effect where the proprietary technologies that aren't keeping customers through innovation are going to have that moat, drained. And I think that the other tools that are doing a better job of innovating and that are more confident in that space, they're needing to keep up and make the building in their tools just as fast with Claude code as anything else. And so I think you're going to see a rapid movement, right? If I were going to update the title of the essay at all, instead of saying your next BI renewal should be your last, I think I'm increasingly convinced that your last one should have been your last, right? The speed of moving off of them and the capabilities in others is so high that there's not a lot of reasons to stay on at this point.
Yeah, and if you just joined us, I just pasted a link to that blog post that Matt referenced in the chat. It's very worth reading. I think things are moving fast, but it's still accurate. And I agree with it. That's where the BI market's going. We got a lot of questions in the chat, and I will get to them in a second. But first, we have to thank today's episode sponsor, Good Data. Good Data has a new white paper I want you to check out, Architecting for AI, Why Agents Will Hallucinate on Your Current Semantic Layer, and the Case for Refactoring. So this, Matt, actually gets to a lot of stuff that we've talked about where if you have a legacy BI semantic layer, there's a good chance that it's not in the type of shape that your agents are going to be very going to be able to take advantage of. The classic example would be, I have a metric and it's defined in 147 Tableau workbooks, but it's defined in slightly different ways and it's named in slightly different ways. Oh, which one should I use? An agent is going to really struggle to make that decision. And once it's made it, if it's made it wrong, it's going to be very convincing to your end users that it has got the right one. So this paper goes through the hows and the whys of refactoring your scattered and poorly linked semantics into a unified semantic layer that makes it easy for downstream applications and agents to understand. So check out the paper. You can scan the QR code on the screen now. So go ahead and download it. And thank you to Good Data for sponsoring this season and today's episode. So we've got a lot of questions and comments in the chat. And I'm going to start with David Pidsley, who's joining us from Gartner. Welcome, David. So he asks, what is this decision intelligence and how does it change things? And this is a trick question because David is the decision intelligence guy at Gartner. So he can tell us if we get it wrong. But he follows it up with, did anyone see Gartner's top trends in data analytics for 2026? The themes were agentic data and analytics, semantics at the core, platformization. I think we've touched on a lot of these things. Decision governance was one of them. So I'll start. I don't know how much you saw the stuff about decision intelligence at the conference, but it was definitely there. David, I specifically went to a kind of what is decision intelligence presentation by one of your analysts that I thought helped a lot. And it went very in depth into the decision intelligence landscape, what decision intelligence tools do and offer. And so what I took away from it was that this category essentially combines a lot of what we traditionally saw, elements of BI, elements of decision science and optimization, or data science and optimization, elements of machine learning, but it ropes in actual decision modeling. So what are we trying to decide? What elements will drive that decision? And then what did we decide? Did it work? And then that feeds back into the platform. So it's almost like wrapping the whole data and analytics industry in this decision making, the science of decision making and decision optimization. So I think it's a really interesting category. I would say this is something that we've always done outside the tooling. And we've either done it just intuitively. People look at the data and they combine it with their gut feel and then they go make a decision. But has there really been a lot of decision tracking at the organizations I've worked with? I would argue no. We're not formally tracking the decisions, deciding on the right decision-making methodology, and then asking ourselves, did it work out in a way that plugs back into and informs the next decision? A lot of this is informally done. It's done in meetings, and the decision is made partially on the data, partially on our experience, partially on what the most important person in the room wants, right? So that was my take on it. Matt, did you see any of this decision intelligence stuff at the show?
Yeah, I think that the decision intelligence content, and then also, if I'm not mistaken, I think, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think there's actually a new Magic Quadrant around decision intelligence platforms, and so to some degree, I think that twofold around it. So first of all, the thing that I was talking about earlier around, the BI tools not doing enough and you need to action them to some degree. That might be simpler than what we're talking about with a full-on decision intelligence platform, right? What we might just be talking about is like better integrations with other SaaS tools combined with like CRUD operations.
Right. Give me a button in BI that triggers the API to do the thing somewhere else.
Yeah, or allow me to just store the decision and then put that back in the warehouse and then reference it later. I mean, even that would be a step up, right? So I think what I would say is something like, do I think that most people frustrated with the legacy BI tools need an entirely new decision platform? Probably not. They probably just need better BI tools, and then there's probably some that could use the platform also. But what I will say also that I think is really exciting about what's happening around like that tooling and with Gartner kind of building a whole new quadrant around it. When you talk about automation via AI, and you talk about just actually understanding the business, having an ontology understanding of the business and everything there. That is, I think, whenever most people talk about that, really geared towards insight finding, right? Collecting data from a lot of different places, understanding the business in the entities enough to come up with insights, et cetera, et cetera. I think that with a lot of companies that I talk to, they've put work into getting that into some kind of system like an ontology or their data structure, their data warehouse or something like that. But most of the actioning part of the business, like what do I do with this decision? How do I make this decision? Kind of more complex decision frameworks, the way that you were talking about. And then more importantly, what happens after I made that? What happens after I make that action? And how do I go about doing that? Those kinds of action-oriented playbooks and decision systems, they're not typically in a system in an organization. They're just in a bunch of people's heads. And so I think that part of the work of getting value out of automated systems over the next upcoming years is going to be getting that out of people's heads, put into systems that agents can action and benefit from. And so I think that there's a need for that category, even if I would argue that there's also a need for the BI tools to just suck less and like do better there too.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. The very first thing in the book that I advocate for when you get a new project as a data analyst or a BI person is the first thing you do is you take everything you already know and you just get it out of your head, even stream of consciousness, into a form that something like Claude or ChatGPT or whoever you're using can structure, and then use that as the first artifact you need in order to, say, build a new analytics application with an AI assistant. Like the very first thing is get the ideas out of your head and then your users and audience and executive sponsors' heads into a place where now we can build the set of instructions that will allow AI to make something actually useful for these people, right? But that's always the first step. And it's, we haven't had good tooling for it. It also hasn't been, I mean, the best people have always been doing this in BI, right? And in data have been grounding everything in the actual people that they work with and what their needs are. But there's been a lot of time in the course of our industry where you're just focused on the tech, you're just building this stuff. And we're notorious for building things that people don't actually use. And this is why, right? So I think it's more important. It's always been very important. It's more important than ever because these AI systems and agentic systems actually need that information in order to build and do decisioning. Here we have a quote from, this is Erin Martin Post. So she says, BI does not force people to take actions. You can get the best BI, but at the end of the day, the best and most clear data doesn't automate change. And this is kind of what we're talking about, moving into a world where it does start to automate change. She says, but we probably aren't here for that conversation. No, we absolutely are here for that conversation.
Yeah,
Aaron.
I agree. I think that's the root cause of the real problem with a lot of the BI tools, right? I mean, the number of times that over the years I would go to a client site and I'd be building a dashboard or a set of decision support tools for them, and I'd just be thinking to myself, we're building a dashboard, but they need an app, right? They need, and by an app, I mean they need some kind of guided workflow that allows them to input things, action things right back into your systems, that sort of thing, right? And so I think that's why you get a lot of frustration around, you get a lot of cliche memes on the practitioner side of things where it's like, I built another dashboard and all they want is an export to Excel button. Well, yeah, they want an export to Excel button because you built a thing that doesn't solve their problems and they have to go solve it themselves now, right? There's another comment in the chat recently saying, adding more tooling to take actions isn't going to fix the organizational problems. And I agree with that. I don't want this to come across as like a couple technology wonks that really like tooling talking about technology and tooling. But I think that really what it is it's tooling that allows you to encapsulate the organizational problem. But it's also, I mean, tooling is one thing, but if I could just take data practitioners and analytics practitioners, people that are building stuff that other people are going to use, and just have them go focus on things like human-centered design classes or action-oriented design or those sorts of things, rather than the BI tooling proprietary problems, I think that would help a lot. Because I think that once you do that, you start realizing that, a lot of these reports, dashboards, et cetera, that I'm building for folks, aren't solving all of their problems, and we're constrained by the tooling capabilities and the availability of the data. And if we just start from that perspective every time we build something, we're always going to wind up with something that no one's really going to use. I think the thing that I'm really excited about is that whether it's through better BI tooling or through agentic coding, you're now able to close that gap and actually do things that you felt like were impossible before, that actually solves the full problem.
That is a great prelude to this question from Danielle Cobley watching on YouTube. By the way, if you're watching on LinkedIn, we simulcast to LinkedIn and YouTube, and the entire show archive is available on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com/c/superdata dive in. There's like 100 shows at this point with this type of thing. So she asks, what would be your advice for BI professionals after your experience at Gartner's conference? How to evolve alongside the changes happening? And I think, what Matt just said would be the first part of my advice, that your expertise in the BI tool specifically, that being the core of your career, is eroding as AI is getting better and better at doing those things. And so your secret sauce, the thing that you need to be able to add, is the ability to work with your audience, your end users, your executives, figure out what should be built and why in a very tightly coupled way to their needs, to the actions they need to take, the decisions they need to make, the value they need to deliver, and then work with AI to make sure that it builds those things. I think BI people are especially well suited to this if you look at all the different subspecialties of data, because BI people really are, in many ways, the contact point between the entire data practice and the business. So as things like context and business value and ontologies and all the stuff we've been talking about become more important, and the ability to be really great at building charts becomes less important, you should find, hopefully, as a BI person, that is your superpower. That is the thing that you're already really good at, that maybe a data engineer is not good at, because they've been focused on pipelines and performance and cost optimization for Snowflake. That's all still very important too. But that contact point between data and business reality, and being the person who can understand business reality and translate it to the tooling, I think is, I am a BI person, not if I were a BI person, I am a BI person. That, I think, is the most important thing to focus on right now. There's a technical side. You have to learn how to work with these AI systems. If you've never used Claude before, you use ChatGPT in your personal life, but you haven't used it at work, you're way behind, I would argue. You do need to understand how these systems work and how to use them to build useful things for your end users. But that's really, I would invest more heavily in the human side of things. And luckily, as a BI person, I think you already know a lot of that stuff. So lean into that. Matt, what would you say?
I think that, so I would echo everything you just said, right? I think that understanding business value, understanding business needs, being able to turn that into something that actually solves those problems and anticipates like what's next for your users and what they're going to want to do next. I think that all makes sense. I would also echo specifically around the AI tools. I think that with the rapidly changing world of AI tools, there's this kind of like step change of understanding that I see happen with different people. And, one of the first ones is around, using the chatbot for some kind of complex task that you didn't think it could do, et cetera, et cetera. I think one of the big ones is, using an agentic coding tool, right? So even if you don't think of yourself as a coder or a developer, even if you're thinking of what you're doing as mostly business tasks, I think that experimenting with any of the long-running agentic coding tools like Claude Code is actually worth doing now, and experiment with it enough that you can like understand what you can build with it and how it applies to your business tasks too. I would definitely recommend doing that if you haven't done that already.
And that kind of gets to this question from Michael Dunphy. And he has a couple good ones. Michael, we'll tackle this one
I like this
first.
one.
Yeah. Do you think the future of BI is just data apps instead of dedicated platforms? It seems to be more software engineering than data analyst at that point.
Yeah, so I've got some opinions here, right? As someone who just joined a BI tool company or an app building tool company, right? That would tend to maybe cancel out my hypothesis that cloud coding is just going to kill all SaaS companies everywhere, right? At least I would hope so. But let me give you a more nuanced view of how I would view that now. If you think about agentic coding tools, whether that's Claude Code or even some of the user-friendly ones like Lovable or Replit or any of those, the cliche is that they're really good at building prototypes, which is true. But the facts of the matter is that you still need some place to deploy to, right? That like if I build a data app inside of Claude Code, then it references my business data in my warehouse, and I'm going to write back somewhere, and I'm going to need to audit who has written what and when, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's a lot harder to do than it is to just get a really good looking spec working locally on my machine, right? So if I think about the future of BI, is it just apps instead of a dedicated platform? I think that what you're going to see is you're going to see new categories arise of infrastructure tools that allow companies to deploy, vibe coded tools into their infrastructure. I think that you will see a kind of a thickening of that layer as people start encoding instructions into the MCP layers to tell the agentic coders how to build into their production environment rather than one-off prototypes. But I think that there's still a role to be played for a pre-built platform that has a flexible set of tools that are all production grade that let you come in and build these experiences rather than just reproduce them from scratch via an agent over and over again each time, right? Because the problem with doing that is that it turns out to be a really inefficient use of tokens, and we're all in a world right now of heavily subsidized token usage while everyone's capturing market share. So like it still feels like you can get away with that, but we're going to be talking about cost optimization of tokens really soon, and that means not recreating every app wheel every time you want to use it. And so I think there's still going to be a role for these platforms. I think there's a role for BI platforms, especially better ones that allow you to prototype experiences that are now production ready as soon as you're done with them. But I do think you're going to see new categories of deployment tools as people need to figure out what to do with those too.
Yeah, and I can't say anything, but I agree. I think that it's very easy to build a very cool app in Claude Code, but we all know that deploying in an enterprise environment involves so much security, reproducibility, auditability. There's a risk management component that it's hard to take what you built in Claude Code at a company of any size and just push it into production and say, hey, this is our BI now. So platforms that give you those foundational pieces, orchestration, security, auditability, traceability, reproducibility, but also the flexibility to build with these AI coding tools, I think have a huge advantage. And you do see that there are BI tools that have that, right? Many of the legacy vendors do not, but a lot of the newer vendors do. They have the APIs and SDKs that Claude can take advantage of, right? And they have integrations. I see a lot of BI tools in the last couple of weeks have announced their MCP server, for example. So you do see that. I see that as the direction we're heading in. I also see the BI front end becoming much more app-like. And this is probably an area where Sigma is leading. And that is, yes, it has the components we think as traditionally BI. It has dashboards and reports and visualizations and filters and drill downs and drill throughs and all that good stuff. But then it has more app-like capabilities? Can I write something into the database? Can I trigger an action in another system? Can I actually do something while I'm looking at the data, not just look at the data and then go somewhere else to do something? I kind of see that as the direction we're headed. And I think at small companies, highly innovative companies, software engineering firms where they really can take, hey, here's the thing I vibe coded, now put it into our production environment. Okay, maybe you just use Claude. But that describes a very small slice of the economy.
And yeah, so I agree on all points. And then what I would, I definitely agree that the future looks more like a toolkit where you can build those experiences, right? Those app-like experiences. And then even imagine those app-like experiences once you start adding like the guided LLM chatbot into your toolkit or custom agents into your toolkit, because then you're going to have your builder be able to build the experiences of the automations that you want, but within guardrails. So that's coming soon, right? And so yep. I think that'll be good too. And then to your point though about a small number of organizations being able to really benefit from something like Cloud Code and Vibe coding. I talk to a lot of those folks, right? Those like small, nimble organizations that are all Claude Code pilled. And what I find really interesting about those is, they're learning very quickly that once you reduce the output of code, the cost of the output of code and the time down to zero, you still have other bottlenecks, right? Yeah. You have organizational bottlenecks around governance. You have understanding and spreading throughout the organization so people can start using these. There's a lot of, once you're able to just build things, there's a lot of things around deployment, diffusion throughout an organization and supporting of users that you have to do too. So,
yeah. And I have this theory about kind of the cost of goods sold of analytics, right? And that's going down. So you think about how much you used to have to spend to generate a chart. It was a lot. If you go back far enough in time, each chart built in Cognos in 2007 probably cost $1,500. And now the cost of generating a chart in Claude Code is just one chart is infinitesimally small, right? But everything around that hasn't changed. So, when you make it really easy to produce something, I think you actually dramatically increase you externalize the costs into other parts of the organization, to your point, Matt. So it's like, yeah, it became a lot easier for us to build code and build apps. But because of that, the communication burden, the security burden, all these things around it now got harder, not easier, because we can produce so much more of this stuff. All right. A couple other... Here's a comment. Again, this is from Erin. She says, I built another dashboard has now turned into I built another AI tool. People aren't asking for them, and they're still not solving actual problems. Sometimes it depends. And this gets back to, at the core of what we've been talking about is, well, you have to understand what you're building, why and for whom, and what the outcome is supposed to be. And making it easier to build stuff doesn't necessarily make it easier to do that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, taste and understanding, I think, are still really, really big parts, and I think that's a sentiment I can commiserate with. Right, I'll work with organizations now that are, what I think of as AI pilled. Right, they're using, everyone has a Claude Max subscription, and they're all using it to apply to all parts of their job, and they tend to be small and nimble, et cetera, et cetera. And when you talk to those organizations, they say they went through a slop problem, right? They went through a problem where people were viewing the outputs from the AI systems as done, and then passing it on to somebody else in a way that was causing more work for somebody else, and then that magnifies. And so, yeah, I think that you have to have an understanding of what you're wanting to build and how it solves somebody's problem. And if you have a system that allows you to take that understanding and leverage it and magnify it, I think that's great. And if you don't have that understanding, then you'll put out a lot of slop that people then have to wade through.
So I do have this question from Michael, and I want to make sure that we get this answered. He's curious when it makes sense, or he wanted to know when to bring it up in the conversation, but could you expand on moving to Sigma and the trends during that transition from other platforms like Tableau? So I know the background here, Michael is one of our regulars, and he kind of has a Tableau-based career that I think he is now looking at Sigma and transitioning more towards Sigma. And so I think it's a very common thing. I'll just put on my prediction hat. The BI Magic Quadrant should come out in 2 or 3 months. I predict that Sigma will enter the Magic Quadrant as a dot on it. I think that the tool is very innovative and the business performance is there to necessitate putting them on the Magic Quadrant. We'll see. But there's a lot of heat behind Sigma right now. And a lot of people are probably looking at this move. So could you just talk about that a little bit, coming from the Tableau world into Sigma, both practically how to do it, but also just your experience as someone who has been a BI consultant for a long time and is now focused strictly on Sigma. What is it that Sigma's doing well?
Yeah, sure thing. I wanted to be careful to talk about this as the larger space and not just be a product shill. But, since you asked, and also, I think that folks that know me know that it would be really hard for me to go work for a product company if I didn't actually, believe in the vision and firmly think that it was a good answer. And so, I can talk through that and a little bit of that. It's funny. I think we've touched on it a little bit as we've been talking through this. Ryan, a point that you've made it several times is something like, there are lots of customers that are maybe locked into even BI 1.0 rather than BI 2.0, right? Like your Crystal reports and your Cognos and that sort of thing. And then we've been saying that there's people that feel locked in there and they feel locked in with their dashboarding tools, their self-service BI tools, et cetera. The thing so I find myself in a role as a kind of like very senior strategy consultant, where, like I said, what I was doing is I was going to these enterprises, complicated ones that are deeply entrenched in something like Tableau or Power BI, and they're frustrated with that experience and they're trying to figure out what's next. And so, I would go through a process with them over and over again that was really about, taking and figuring out the jobs to be done of the analytics system for that company, right? How do we start with the people that are participating in it, whether those are developers or consumers or administrators, figure out the problems that they have, and then map that back to a system that solves those problems in a way that's repeatable. And like I kind of jokingly said earlier, the answer at the end of each one of those engagements was Sigma over and over again. Not all the time, but like 4 out of 5 times. And so I've given that a lot of thought, and I think there's some reasons for that. One is they are, I think, one of the few providers in the space that are taking a user-centered approach to solving problems. And so what I mean by that is that, there's a reason there's a lot of people locked into, let's say, Crystal reports or business objects or those sorts of things. And it's because the BI 2.0 vendors never really took away the need for that.
Yes.
And so a thing that I found really interesting about Sigma is that, we've just released a bunch of custom like AI features and features around that side. But at the same time we did that, at the same time we're releasing AI app features, we also released a pretty large set of features around pixel perfect reporting and report bursting and what you might call operational reporting, right?
I got to tell you, Matt, when I saw this release, this is when I was like, okay, these guys are playing for keeps, right? Like they are going, nobody in BI 2.0 has really been able to go after that BI 1.0 install base because they will not build this feature set.
Yeah.
And when I saw that Sigma built it, it was like, these guys are going for the whole apple, right? They just don't want to bite. They want the whole thing.
And whenever I used to be on the consulting side of things, I used to come in to Tableau customers and, do a multi-week project around bolting on pixel perfect reporting or report bursting or those sorts of capabilities onto Tableau. Because, you can do it if you're like masochistic enough and you want to do enough things in PowerShell and that sort of thing. And so, and now I see a product that is making that a first-class feature where you can just like literally point it at an email field in Snowflake for report bursting and then have it iterate through and send those out. And it's great. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and say, like, I went to Sigma and everyone should look at Sigma because of their pixel perfect reporting. But I'm saying I think a really good example of them looking around and saying, this is a real need that customers have. It is wild to us that we're still doing it the same way we were 20 years ago. Here's a thoughtful approach that, doesn't necessarily result in a lot more vendor revenue, but does actually solve their problems. So that's part of it. And then if I'm thinking about the category space of what I want a BI tool to do, I really wanted to do that, the operational reporting things that we were talking about. I wanted to do the dashboarding things really, really well with live connections to the cloud data warehouse. But what I really want is I want to be able to build those app interfaces that we were talking about before. I want to take the data that's in the warehouse and build workflows on top of it, or build entire experiences on top of it that are augmented with LLMs in safe ways. And I think that's the set of capabilities that results in Sigma like dominating anyone in the BI space. I think that I feel pretty confident about any sort of traditional BI use case and us fitting well and doing really well there. But I think is also expanding what we're doing into something that's more like business app development or AI app development, if I'm using our marketing terms. I think there's a whole set of problems that the BI tools never touched, and I'm really excited about like going after those with the AI parts of the toolkit too. So that's my like spiel on Sigma and my personal reason for going there. I think that it's fixing a lot of the gaps in the BI space and doing so in a way that's not just about like locking people into larger platforms in a way that I'm excited about.
I hope that we maintain a space for independent BI vendors. You've seen so much consolidation of the market into the platform vendors, the existing mega vendors, and then people who would like to be a mega vendor. To have someone like Sigma who's executing at a high level and is not part of one of these. I know you guys are quite closely tied to Snowflake in general, which makes sense, right? But you're not Snowflake. You are an independent vendor, and having independent vendors in the BI space, I think is important. I do not want to live in a world where BI is at the enterprise level, especially, is just a feature you get with your enterprise license of something else. I think that's a world where there's very little BI innovation, and it's just not exciting. So, to have you guys executing at a high level independently of the mega vendors is great. Now, if you're a Tableau person today, and we're almost out of time here, but I do want to make sure we get this in. Let's say you're a Tableau developer. Like, what does the path for you to pick up Sigma look like?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So tactically speaking, like if you're just curious, right? We've got a free track on Data Camp. Anyone can go to. They can sign up for it and use that. So I think that's helpful. Reach out if you want access to that. But I'll be honest with you, as someone who, like, over the past couple of years, I mean, so my background and my career was really built on Tableau, right? I have a like deep Tableau expertise, frankly, a deep like love and affection for Tableau as a product, and if you can't pick up on it, a little bit of a loathing for Salesforce for ruining it, right? I think that I found the transition to be extremely easy, right? I think that over the past few years, Sigma has put a lot of development into its dashboarding capabilities and its ability to do things the way that you'd expect to do them in Tableau. I think that the online trainings make sense. I would also plug our quick starts, and we can link to those. We've put a lot of work into building these like really practical tutorials that anyone can go through and build from it. But I'll be honest with you, I found it extremely easy to pick up and use. And then we've got some up and coming agentic AI features that'll make it even easier. But yeah, I think that Data Camp's a good place to start, and then also our quick starts are pretty great.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time here. Thanks for joining us, folks. Listen, if this is your first time watching on either platform, thank you. I hope you come back next week. Same time, we will have an interview with Ramona Truta. Ramona's doing all sorts of fascinating AI research. I want to go deep with Ramona on her experience with that. Ramona's also just a fascinating person and does a really good job of of teaching about AI, but also contextualizing the human experience of it. And that's one of the reasons I love talking with her. So next week, we're going to have Ramona on. Go ahead and do me a favor. Click the like button, subscribe, hit the bell. If you're watching on LinkedIn, go over to YouTube and do that. Help us grow the channel. Matt, where can people keep up with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have a website called convivialtools.org. It's hard to spell, but you've been doing a great job of linking to it, so I appreciate it. Just feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm going to be at all the major conferences coming up, so if anyone's going to be at Snowflake or Databricks and wants to come say hi, I'll be at the Sigma booth doing AI demos. So,
all right. Well, thank you for joining me, Matt, and thank you for watching, everybody. Tune in next week. Until then, I'm Ryan Dolley. This has been the Super Data Brothers Show. Bye.